Hey everyone, welcome back to the Startup Storybook podcast. Our college entrepreneur today is Logan Russell, founder of Runner's High Cookies. Logan, thanks for coming on the show.
You guys bet.
So, we want to just jump right in to Runner's High Cookies. You were telling us you did 4,000 cookies in 2024 last year, and you've done already, I think, 6,000 in 2025. So, what's it like running a solo cookie business that's doing that type of volume?
Well, it can be a little bit challenging sometimes. The biggest thing is just time management. I'm currently go to Texas A&M right now for Master's of Urban Planning, and there's definitely a balance that you have to have as a student entrepreneur and as a student business owner between school and baking. And, a lot of that really just comes down to ensuring that, granted grad school is a little bit different than undergrad. It's 12 credit hours a semester, depending on the program. Um, but it was, its work is a little bit more intense, more writing, more collaboration, more group projects. There's more of an intensity towards the work and, or at least importance to what you're actually doing because there's actually some like involvement. And, I am going to school to eventually try to get a career when I graduate. But and then meanwhile, I have created something back when I was an undergrad student that I didn't know would go this far, and that being Runner's High Cookies. And originally during undergrad years, it was really easy to manage, but that was also because I didn't have as much demand. And over the years, it's like, oh yeah, now people are hearing about me through the internet. Typically, it's like almost word of mouth, a little bit of a cult-ish, a little bit of like a cultish, like, grapevine word of mouth, especially through like the Aggie parents, moms, dads ordering for their son, daughters, or whoever, or even people out of state that are like, oh, deliver these cookies to a friend that's in College Station. And that's been recently kind of my clientele. And I've been getting more orders because of that. And so now I'm
Mhm.
running into particular issue where it's like, oh yeah, I am definitely having to go back home more to bake. Sometimes I get orders like literally being told like, oh, I want this by tomorrow. And I'm like, okay, technically I can, but there's more pressure on me as the individual to get that out. And there's healthy pressure to that, just to get the work done. But then there's also like, oh yeah, I'm still a student. So you really have to have that balance between like when you can basically throw on like your student hat, take that off, put on the baker hat, and then also still have a social life too, like
Mhm.
having to, see your significant other to celebrating your own birthday with your own friends and other friends' birthdays. And that's, you have to kind of go along and yeah, I say muddle through it, but there's muddling through and there's actually getting through it. And pretty much you have to almost take things week by week because one week you can have, let's say zero cookies, zero cakes baked. And then the next you can be told, oh yeah, I need 200 cookies for my semi-formal for my organization. And then you're making that. And then all of a sudden during the mid process, you'll get an order saying, oh yeah, I want a cookie cake by tomorrow. Can you do that? And then you got the butter technically already at room temperature, and it's like, well, I guess I can.
Yeah. So two questions. One will be really quick. So first of all, when did you start the company? Let's go with that for now.
So I started Runner's High Cookies in August of 2022.
Hmm.
The reason for that date was because I spent the summer prior trying to figure out how to actually go about home-based bakeries, which my, Runner's High Cookies is just a Texas cottage food bakery business, so home-based baker.
Mm-hmm.
And here in the state of Texas, that's the set of laws that actually allow me to operate here within my parameters. And when I started it, I think it was like a week before before the fall semester for my junior year started. That was, my semester, basically when I started was in correlation when I started my semester in College Station.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had a different question, but you sparked it based on what you just said there. So there's different rules for different sizes of companies. Can you elaborate on that? Because I'm curious. I don't know anything about the space.
So in terms of like bakers or how kind of like at least my understanding of how like bakeries work is that obviously you have home-based bakers and that's your cottage food law businesses. Um these are your businesses that are would originally used to only do like cookies, brownies, simple cakes, or actually I say simple. Some are some are really elaborate and pretty, almost better. Really puts those store bought cakes you can get really to shame or into perspective of how much talent there is for just a home based baker. But
Hmm.
you don't have a storefront, meaning that, do you really want to put your business address that you technically live in on Google Maps in order for people to find you whenever people search up local cookies near me? And going back, like because I've had the time to invest in a website and just take care of search engine results, I'm actually able to show up when people look up like on the first page local cookies near me or in typically in the context of the College Station Bryan area or Bryan College Station area, but the Google Maps, that kind of trumps over whatever shows on Google Maps and sponsored that goes higher up than me. And those are when you go into like actual chain bakeries that go into storefronts. And that's when, you become more licensed because you're actually doing like more things. You're handling cookies that can actually, require refrigeration. So like cream cheese based products and more fillings, ice cream, those require more certifications by like state and federal. That's kind of
Hmm.
like, there's cottage food and then there's your actual like corporation bakery um, that are operating off of like storefronts that require like county health permits and such like that. As a cottage food baker, you're not like subject to county health inspections. And that is because you're selling food that is low risk and very, it's low risk to the public. And those are foods that are permissible by state law. And those state laws vary by state by state. Like, let's say Idaho state cottage food laws can differ, vibrantly from Texas. But recently there actually has been a pretty large expansion of the cottage food where now you can actually start selling perishable foods that were initially not allowed by the old cottage food laws. Like cream cheese was a no-no under the old ones, but now under the new laws as of September 1st of this year, 2025, yeah, you can start selling like cream. You can start selling cheesecakes now. You can do like actually instead of imitation cream cheese, yeah, you can do real cream cheese. You can start. There's a really odd one where it's like, yeah, you couldn't sell like sliced fruit. Now you can. You can do wholesale now, which that is a big deal if it's like you want to have like a way to network with like hotels and potentially like leave cookies out there. There's still some things you have to go through with the Department of Health and Safety Services, like to register and new labeling saying like, oh, this food needs to be refrigerated after X amount of minutes, hours out of the refrigerator or something like that. Oh, and then even doing that with wholesaling. But that's kind of where like I'm at. I'm very, very much at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of like licensing and what you can do as a cottage food baker. And that's just pretty much where I'm at. It does limit kind of the opportunities you do have because, like, yeah, like just I said, you don't have a storefront. So you're operating in the space that you live in. And so you're pretty much confined to like, the places you reside in as cottage food bakers.
Yeah. One last follow up on that idea. So, do you plan on just staying at this level, or do you eventually foresee the company going larger and leveling up? I guess.
So when it comes down to how my business has grown in the past 3 years, like it has definitely, it's made a profit. But, being a student, it's come with a lot of benefits that have actually lowered the cost of like operating and actually a lot of opportunities to sell, within the A&M ecosystem because, if someone, I study urban planning and my focus is trying to go in economic development, a little bit of transportation planning. There's such an emphasis on ensuring that you are in as a bakery business in areas that where there are people. It's, there's density involved. And, A&M, downtown Bryan, Northgate, Century Square, like there's only a handful of areas in Bryan College Station where you can like actually find people just like on the sidewalk walking. And even when you do find people, it's like, yeah, you got to make sure, not everyone's going to buy a cookie And, you can
Mhm.
say, I can be in the MSC with my student org, doing a little fundraiser where I come in with like maybe 100 to 200 cookies. And, A&M is like, I don't know how many people are on the main campus anymore. It's like maybe over 60,000, probably more. And, I'm in the MSC, basically the heart of campus, and there's probably hundreds of thousands of people walking in those front doors. And then here I am in a hallway corridor trying to sell, maybe 120 cookies within like 5 hours. And sometimes I'll have maybe a sellout, sometimes I'll have 10. But that really just shows kind of a perspective like, oh yeah, that's a very small, that's not even like a percent of campus. It's not even half a percent of the campus population that like that chose to bought from you that day. And there is a general perception of like, yeah, more licensing, more professional businesses are going to get recognized, more people trust brands than just stumbling upon, Logan's cookies, but Runner's High cookies. There's started to been more of attraction I've seen. Like people maybe 3 years ago have had my cookies from like a pop-up when I was doing something in my apartment complex for the first time to get experience. And they're like, oh my gosh, I remember you. Yeah, of course I want to buy from you. And, going back to the question of, kind of choosing to level up, go to maybe a storefront, you know, I haven't really had the chance to actually experiment with that because I'm still personally trying to figure out if I want to stay in Bryan College Station or go back home to Orange, Texas, where my hometown area, we don't really have much investment into our current downtown situation, along with, we're very reliant on interstate highway access, and that is very much, we very much get corporate businesses copy and paste chains, generic Americas, as some urban planners like to say. And, if you try to go up against the current that is trying to open a local business in a walkable area in a town that isn't really prioritizing that development, then, how much it's basically how much money you want to lose just to test a theory. But in Bryan College Station, there's really more discussion about downtowns here and how important they are for the community here, and most importantly, how much A&M and the ID network has an influence on gravitating people to businesses here. And there's very much of a, support local, and there are more local businesses here. And I feel like I would have a better opportunity here, but that is a conversation I'll have to have with my parents and such.
Mhm.
So you mentioned earlier you have a pop up in the campus center, and you see maybe 1,000 people come by, and only maybe 50 of them buy a cookie, right? Do you think that's because the percentage of people coming by just don't want the cookies, or do you think it's because, like you said, there's 60,000 people on campus, but you only get to see 1,000 of them? That's what, 6%? Do you think, like, I don't know. I was wondering scenarios like that. If it were possible to broadcast to all 60,000 people, I mean, I feel like you would sell out a lot quicker. And honestly, that's not realistic. But it begs the question of scale of, is Logan's runner's high cookie business possible to grow that big? I think it might be.
So kind of the food for thought is a lot of the reasons why like my own pop-ups, whenever I guess for talking about how I've been scaling for the past 3 years, initially when I started, it was just a Google order form. And a Google order form through not Facebook, through an Instagram. I had a Facebook, but I stuck primarily on Instagram. And that had only, the only reason I had orders because I would just constantly follow people and just hoping they would order, just hoping. And eventually after like 6 months or around the 6 month time frame, I was able to invest into a website because there was a women's org that at least I got to know like one of the leadership members from in my hospitality classes, and they were like, oh, let's buy from this Logan guy. And they took basically a gamble because like, yeah, it's a guy at a home-based bakery, there's not much level. They don't really, this would be for his first big order. Well, they love the cookies so much so that that women's org has still ordered from me to this day, even though the people and leadership crowd have changed over the years. And that's really important because, yeah, I got the website. I started getting more online orders because of that. But then I was like, oh, it wasn't too many. Honestly, it just kind of streamlined the ordering process. But I was like, okay, let me try pop ups. I heard about how great farmers markets are. Well, I couldn't get into the main farmers market here in town, and that was the only one, which was the Brazos Farmers Market, which I have no idea if anyone from that audience would be listening, but essentially they were no longer accepting simple baked good vendors, and so I was pretty much out because I just did cookies, and there were just too many people selling cookies at the markets. And so that led me to basically asking my apartment complex, can I do pop-ups here at the pool? And so I started selling literally cookies to people at a pool in my apartment complex where a good portion of them might have been drunk, but they still bought. And at least from there, that's how I got my experience. And I started doing more events with the vintage sellers crowd. And so I was really hitting a niche market with vintage clothing at Bryan College Station because, again, couldn't do the farmers market. So I kept on building up experience. I got more people to eventually learn about me through social media. That encouraged more orders. And so my structure for the longest time was I have an Instagram, I have the website, I go to pop-ups and I pretty much promote, I tell them like go to these channels if I really impress you with my baking, because that's how you can find me if you really do, if you don't really want to travel to pop up to pop up to pop up. And then eventually, a question dawned on me like, is how do I get to campus? Because then I started realizing, oh yeah, as someone that got into urban planning, you need density. You need to have the most amount of people in a space because then you have more opportunities to sell someone a cookie. Now, pop-ups have become now secondary, or at least right now, because school's been taking a little bit more precedent right now with academia essays and projects and trying to come up with basically my professional paper topic, which is diet level thesis. I'll take for example, like one week, the first week of school, I sold within like the Memorial Student Center, the MSC on Texas A&M, a Monday, a Thursday, and then a Friday. So I think it was like Monday I sold out, Thursday I had some leftover cookies, and then Friday I sold out. And the real thing is consistency. Because
Yeah.
yeah, if you try to Google local student business owners near me or like student business owners near me, nothing's gonna come up. And that is not because of poor search engine results. That's just because that's not really a thing because most business owners may not always have a website. And especially since I'm in a student organization group called Aggie Entrepreneurs, we're working with sometimes a lot of business owners that never have done pop-ups because they don't know the channels or because some of them actually their products don't even count as actual art or merchandise that they can sell at the main hospitality organization tourism groups here in town. So there's no recognition there. And so here we come trying to provide them a space on campus. And, it's a gamble. Pop-ups are not a guarantee. I like to joke now saying that, most people have their gambling addiction and mine is going out selling cookies on a 4 to 6 foot table space and hoping that the stars align and the temperature and humidity is right because yeah, I mean, someone rushing to the bus may not want to stop for a cookie. Someone, weather outside being 90 degrees is not really going to be influential, is not going to help you buy a baked good or really listen to the Logan story. There's also other issues where it's like brand representation on campus, because typically we're doing this through student organizations as members, and so really the student org gets represented first, and so it's really become like Aggie Entrepreneurs and then Runners High. That's a little bit of A&M thing. The really truth is if you want to make like pop-ups profitable and really consistent, you really have to find like same location, same consistent time, but you almost basically sacrifice your status as a student and put
Mhm.
probably your grades at jeopardy because now you're no longer investing the time to actually put into homework. And then, oh yeah, then if you're not a student, then yeah, you can't sell in the first place. So you have to kind of like, there's some give and there's some loss for these pop-ups. So under the certain conditions, you can become more recognized. Yeah, from the first one, you're starting off at a base, but from there, that's opportunities to actually incrementally grow an audience that, doesn't always check on their phone to Google local businesses near me. You really have to make an impact on somebody to actually earn them wanting to buy from you. And I've been able to gain that with a couple of like acquaintances and some that eventually see me as friends and I see them as friends as well. One customer in which invited me over to their graduation little party, so that was kind of funny. I had a great time speaking to their family, but you leave a lasting impression just from one little pop up that they didn't know about, and there's really those surprise encounters that really can convince people to come back for more.
And are those impressions kind of your favorite part about running your business?
Oh yeah, they're the pretty much the bread and butter because you know taste, everyone has different taste. Some people say my cookies are the best, better than crumble, better than insomnia, better than tips, better best cookies in town. And then we still have people that go to crumble. We still have people that go to insomnia, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's just there's convenience and there's how much time someone wants to put into it. And then sometimes, there people just quickly see cookies at an HEB that are there, and they need to have something for a meeting, yoink, and they go. And that's nothing wrong with that. That's just how markets work. I can't always have cookies on the dime. If I did, then I would most likely have a lot actually go bad.
Mhm.
And that's when it comes down to really leaving an impression. That's really what draws people back to my business is how impressed they are. Now, granted, I don't know if they're impressed because they weren't expecting um, I'm basically a college graduate to really pull off a good recipe, or it's because they've heard from their friends that, oh my gosh, you should buy from this runner's high cookie person. If you ever see that bear, you see that running cookie tablecloth, he's got good stuff.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, can you tell us more about the history of the recipe of why you're doing this in the first place?
Oh yeah, I sure can. When I first started, it was because my mom shared with me my grandma's chocolate chip cookie recipe. And the funny story is that my grandma apparently ripped that off of the back of a Nestle Toll House cookie recipe from way back when of her time and altered it to make it her own. But the whole reason why my mom taught it with me was that I think it was just the summer before going into my junior year of high school. And growing up, cookies were my go-to dessert. Loved cookie cakes. The Great American ones were my favorite. But when I learned the recipe from my mom, I was like, "Oh, why don't we, put in these different flavor why don't we put in all these different flavorings and chips in there?" So what I ended up creating was now a cookie that I called a start line. It was like a chocolate chip, salted caramel, and toffee cookie. And I shared that with my teammates, my cross country team, the beginning of my junior year. They loved it, and at the same time, we were discussing about potential fundraisers. And I said, "Well, why don't we sell these cookies as a fundraiser?" And that's what we did. And after about, basically how sport team works, you basically running one semester, and then the next, you don't really do anything until the next. So after about 2 years of fundraising, so about 2 semesters worth, we were able to get the money to help fund new uniforms and equipment for the team. I graduated, so I wasn't sure what it all looked like, but we were able to raise some money on our own. We weren't really a running school at all. We didn't even have a track. So we were very
Mhm.
much running on a road with that had no shoulder, and immediately there was just a drop off to a ditch. So we weren't really the best. That's why we needed the money in the first place for ourselves because a lot of our stuff was outdated. But coming to Texas A&M was fall of 2020. I was just baking leisurely for friends and family. Didn't have like a the dorms I lived in didn't have community kitchens, so I would have to bring my mixer and all my ingredients over to friends' apartments or to their community kitchens on campus where I can actually bake for them. And so my friends were joking, saying how like instead of alcohol or booze, it was me just dealing them cookies after an evening's worth of like I don't know work, And they eventually were asking me, "Oh, these are great. Can you make me like a salted caramel pretzel cookie? Can you make me like a cookies and cream one?" And so I would experiment with their suggestions and just them trying them. They were like, "These are great. Go get them out there to more people." And after my roommate had tried the cookies and cream one and said, just go sell them. I was like, well, let me actually do that. And so, kind of goes back to what I was saying the summer before my junior year of college or my undergrad, I was just like, oh yeah, I learned about college food law, started to look a little bit more into the baking to learn like, oh yeah, this is some techniques, these are some things you can better do. And the recipe was all ready, an all purpose one. So I started out with initially 6 flavors. It was chocolate chip and chunk, the start line, that my specialty, salted caramel pretzel, cookies and cream, Reese's peanut butter chip and chocolate, and it was like an M&M sprinkle one. And then eventually it was like all the flavors I kind of created over time were ones either I wanted to make or it was because I had a friend that was like, you should make like a snickerdoodle one. And some of the flavors my friends has suggested have been the ones that the clients, customers they're like their favorite, like the s'mores, snickerdoodle, salted caramel pretzel, cookies and cream. The ube has been very much a hit for some of my clientele. Even my own best friend switched his favor from the s'mores to ube in like a second when he had a first bite of that new flavor. So it's that was kind of how I got started with it. And you know I guess, even prior to then, it was what really kinda got me more into the baking when I was doing that with friends and family was when I took a trip to New York City, um, winter of 2022, so this was still during pandemic times, and I actually got COVID on my way back, but we went to, like, some of the bakeries there. My cousin knew I loved cookies, so that was the whole reason going to New York was visiting my cousin, so she was like, "Oh, yeah, let's go to this, like, bakery places," and, I had a whole day to myself, and I went to this place called Levain Bakery, and it was, like, 5 I think it was either 5 or 6 ounces of just cookie, and these things were massive, and I was like, I could do so much more with the recipe, which is then, um, you know, going to my sophomore year when I was baking for my friends, like I mentioned about the salted caramel pretzel, cookies and cream, that's when I was also altering my recipe, trying out, like, different types of butter, baking techniques, and that kinda led me to runner's high cookies being made.
Very cool. And so obviously, I think on your website it says you have 20 something different flavors. How many?
Mhm. I think it's now over 20. I like to say 20 plus, because now I am starting to lose count of them sometimes. There are some seasonal ones that occasionally slip my mind, but yeah, 20 plus flavors.
Cool. So you were mentioning to us earlier that you kind of keep analytics on all of your cookie types, all the pop ups, all how many you're baking. So can you kind of explain to us what you keep the numbers of, why you do it, and what you've learned from having those numbers?
Well, I guess the first thing obviously is like profit. I use QuickBooks, and that's pretty simple. I say pretty simple, but once as a student entrepreneur business owner, you have the funds to get like a QuickBooks for like managing those finances. You can see your profit loss reports, and that just takes pretty much all the income I make from my business account, which different point of sale systems, my website, from pop ups, cash, and funnels it all together for like a little report analysis. So actually knowing if I'm made a profit throughout the years, and so that's pretty nice. But then I also keep track of my how many cookies I bake in a week. Part of the reason why my head's angled right now is because I'm actually looking at my numbers right now, or I'm pulling up the numbers. Um, I think I mentioned, the cookie counts are important because I guess it's also like a little progress thing at the end of the year. It's like, "Oh, yeah, this is how much, like, I've made throughout the years." And, it shows kind of like, "Oh, how many cookies you made." And I believe actually last year, it wasn't, 4,000, it was like it was over 6,220 cookies for 2024. And the current 5 count, I believe, is at let me see here, I'm not sure if it's been updated. I believe is at actually at four little over 4,600 right now. That the number of cookies you bake doesn't always correlate to profit. Sometimes those cookies were sometimes I bake for myself, but I still track it because it's like, oh yeah, this is how much we still baked. And the reason why that's also important, the secondary function is that another one of my business initiatives that I haven't really kept too much on because of school is that for every 1,000 cookies I make, I spend an hour picking up trash here in the community. And part of the reason why I haven't kept up with this so much is because I would do a lot of my hours back home and I just didn't log it or I didn't have a way to measure it because my back home in Orange, we have this like little lake walk area that just gets absolutely riddled with litter, garbage, trash from barges on the Louisiana side of the state, and it drifts over to Orange. And I'm not even joking, like literally just tons of like respirator mask, air filters, soda cans, plastic bottles. It's the same type of trash. So it's the same people just almost throwing it into practically just throwing it into the water. And it's like office, and we know it's from them because of all the industrial grade level trash that we're literally digging up from the sand, or we literally just see like a one of those big old gallon size office water cooler jugs. So we know, like, okay, there's like that doesn't make sense for someone literally to just throw all this stuff all over. It had to drift over here. So I'm trying to do more things with that, and I need to just because it shows that like, hey, this is we value people. It shows that people should buy from us because like, yeah, there's also a secondary impact. We go out and spend some community service in the areas that, quite frankly, I get tired of seeing littered when I go out running or walking to the bus here in Bryan College Station. And another thing I keep track of is, and this is also going back to QuickBooks, is my business mileage. So it tracks. QuickBooks is a little fancy feature where it tracks with your phone. It tracks you, point A to point B whenever you're driving, commuting. And for someone that not only drives but bikes and buses, sometimes I have to always go through and always like, no, that was not car. That was not car. That was not car. That was not car. But out of on a business standpoint, I do bike a good healthy percentage of my total mileage, including like for deliveries to grocery pickups, because hey, biking can save you some money. Biking can not only keep you fit, but it saves you money even if it's 40% of your miles driven. I think I saved upwards close to $200 because I chose to bike a good portion of the miles, and that's just by fuel savings. There's only, I'm athletic, I run marathons, and, runner's high cookies, I'm a runner. I like to actually apply that strength in areas where I can to either save me money or dodge traffic because College Station does have some bike lanes. They're not always great, but they're there, and you'll be amazed how fast I can get around traffic during like 5:30 p.m. rush because there's very little people using the sidewalks. Bike lanes can be in their own thing, and I can completely bypass an entire intersection because I'm just on my foot, because I'm on foot on bike. And the person that I had to go to was only 1.5 miles down the road. And if I chose to get by car, then I would have just been stuck all ways. So there's another tracking those business miles, it reflects kind of like our, by choosing to bike, we save X much money. It allows us to have cheaper delivery rates. And most important, and I'm someone that did Boy Scouts and was outdoors a lot. Yeah, there's some environmental benefits to it as well. But sometimes given the current political climate, saying climate doesn't always bring their tune, but saving money does.
That's great. I really love how intentional you're being with 1,000 cookies, and we're gonna go do an hour of picking up trash. I think that's really just great, and it shows the heart of what you're doing. I love it.
Yeah. Question for you now. Uh, you mentioned towards the beginning of our conversation about having to switch back and forth between wearing the student hat and wearing the business slash baker hat. And I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit more about that and maybe give us some advice as to like how you balanced those two different things.
So I guess balancing all the hats that, I kind of wear throughout my day, or I guess throughout the semesters here, it kind of changes really just on the semester or the year. I guess for my undergrad phase, the workload for that was not like it was during grad school, which is weird because was taking more classes, but some of those classes was either busy work you just got done, or it was either you had a big old, end of the semester project you were building towards. And sometimes there were
Hmm.
gaps for that. And so, but because, you're taking classes by the semester, not by the year, things constantly change, your hours change. You might have had one semester where you were Tuesday and Thursday, but then the next now, congratulations, you have 8 a.m.s. So that's not great. Consider I got through all my undergrad without ever having an 8 a.m., but now grad school, congratulations, you got 8 a.m.s. Yay. But that kind of changes, how you can be at home for stuff. And, the attitude was, oh yeah, pop-ups are how I'm making my money, and that's how I'm going to generate exposure. So pop-ups are my focus, requiring me to stay home, try to contemplate on how many cookies I need to make versus, how, could the weather affect things? Could the crowd actually not be as expected? Usually it's like trying to pull mental gymnastics to try to figure that out. But now the context I'm going through is, pop-ups I can't do right now because of my academics are taking up all my time, or at least like the stress of that is like, oh yeah, you shouldn't be scheduling yourself a pop-up on campus because that's going to take up too much time because you're going to have some healthy demand and it's going to go well, which is a good thing, but then you can't have to you need time to write on your paper, you have to do these reports, you have to come up with these topics. But now I'm getting orders online. And so really it's like your location very much changes. Like, oh yeah, maybe you're home more where you can, be on the computer trying to force yourself to be more productive. And, there's not as much time for you to kind of like goof off, maybe. Like I like going to coffee shops. There's one particular place I have. It's like my little third place where I just like to frequent. And but there's time that gets taken up for the commutes, and so maybe it's like, okay, maybe don't bother with trying to commute to that place. Just stay home and don't sacrifice time. Just get the work done so you can switch over to your other hat. And, then when that's done, it's okay, take a break. I need to put on my own hat so I can actually make myself my own food. And from there, it's like, oh yeah, the dishes have now dried. I can go back to baking again. And then now it's 9 p.m. How much work is left? Let me set myself a timer for 30 minutes to get done with some work. FaceTime my girlfriend after, go to bed, start preparing for go to bed, and then just get ready for the next day. I'm really a morning person, not a night person, because I work out in the morning, or whenever I run, it's typically in the morning because you start out with the first thing. And so it's kind of like having set time frames when you do things. And so, yeah, you start the semester maybe with different class schedules and you kind of like build your entire week around that schedule, and you are able to kind of squeeze in, okay, this is where I can run here. If something does need to change, okay, this is where my backup run can be, like in the afternoon, because I can run on the treadmill here in my apartment. To, oh yeah, orders can spring up, but if it does spring up, I'll stay on campus where I'm working, and if I get the notification like I did today, I'll just take the bus back home and go set out the butter because it's in the afternoon and I have time to, let that get to room temperature so I can actually start making the dough. And then, oh yeah, maybe have enough time to go get groceries like I did today. And so that's what I did. It really just comes down to, if there is an opening in your schedule, you still have work to do. So put yourself in a position where you can be productive, I guess to say that. And if there is a hat switch that, you're still communicating with like friends and family, maybe just letting them know like, oh, hey, to my significant other, like, "Hey, I'm gonna be busy baking tonight," and they're like, "Oh yeah, cool. I'm actually gonna be busy too, so we'll FaceTime later tonight." It's just repetition, consistency, and holding yourself pretty much accountable to those things is what really allows you to kind of like easily switch those hats. And it was really funny because last year I had not only what is it? I not only had my grad school hat, and we're considering this like I guess life things going on, grad school life to the business life. But then I was also the treasurer for, and I'm still the treasurer for that student org, Aggie Entrepreneurs I mentioned earlier. But then I was also a battalion. I was working with a battalion A&M's student newspaper with as their distribution carrier. So I was delivering papers, but it was kind of like it was very like you were sub part time, so you got pretty much called up whenever you needed to do work. And then all the while, I think there was like I'm trying to remember what the other hat I was wearing, but those were like I was having to juggle between like four hats, and one it was like I don't know how I made it work last year, but now it's like okay, you drop the battalion. Job right now. I'm still on their payroll because occasionally they need help. You know, I made a great connection there. They were still meeting in that work, but sometimes when you're getting close to the end of your academics, which is I'm supposed to graduate May 2026. It's you know one of those hats are those hats slowly start coming off, and you don't put them back on unless you have another I don't know 30,000 to spend in total tuition money. Uh, but at least you're for A&M because that's the only way I can actually keep the student hat going is PhD route, and that's not really something I am all too interested in right now. Maybe in the future, but for now, it's just yep, get done with grad school, figure out if I want to stay here in College Station, and then your new hat would be what's going to be your full time gig at that point.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd say one of the things that is a demotivating factor when it comes to starting a business in college is, or at this age in life, really, is it just feels like there's so many different things vying for our attention. And I mean, when I think about it, I was thinking to myself while you were saying all the different hats that you were wearing, I was like, I've got this, the podcast, and I've got school. And then I was like, wait a minute, no, this like school, almost each one of my classes is almost its own path. Like when I'm working on my software engineering project, that's a totally different like responsibility than me working on my well, say another project for another class. So even then, it's like there's so many different things, and it's really tough. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Turner, as far as like balancing even things within school?
Um, well, I think for me, um, school has not become a lesser priority, but to some
Hmm.
extent, it has become okay, well, I'm going to get out of school what I put into it. And the things that I am extremely interested in and are challenging me, I will spend the time to work on. For example, for me right now, that is a Logan. I don't know if you remember if I've told you, I'm a music major. So conducting is pretty difficult, but also very fun. So I'm spending some decent time on that. There's a startup teams class I'm taking. That again is um,
Hmm.
some time. Wes, I don't know if I think of it as different hats as much as kind of you were saying, as where like each class is a different hat. To me, I kind of feel like these are just all the different things, at least within school, that
Hmm.
are kind of just part of school. And so for me, like I lump school into one hat. And when I need to work on school, I work on school. But then
Hmm.
but also like music classes are not quite the same as computer science classes. So I recognize that too.
Yeah. I think the reason that I was saying that was because it's like different projects require totally different mindsets when approaching them. It's like, I don't know. Would you say the same thing, Logan, with different things
Oh yeah,
you've got?
yeah, especially if like you got a project in the class that's like a group one, because then the hat is
Hmm.
entirely different because you would hate to be a group member that's like completely disassociated with your group and is just like, oh, sorry, guys, I was making like 200 cookies what's up. It's that kind of feeling where it's like, yeah, you want to make sure you're still active in the class. And yeah, it really comes down to if you're really engaged with the class, that's good because it shows you want to be there. As to me, sometimes where, I've been occasionally just like, oh yeah, the lecture today isn't too important. I guess I'm just going to, either one, I'm just going to not go to class and then prioritize getting a bake done or preparing for a marketplace, or two, I'm just not going to go to class because I want to be at, maybe at the campus Starbucks, just getting done with that professor's assignments there instead of like just waiting until after class, which I'm not the only one that does it. We got a lot of grads, we won't believe how many people still don't show up to class to grad school because, like, yeah, we want to get done with work or life has been very stressful recently. And professors can be pretty lenient depending on who you got as a professor. But yeah, I mean, if your class is, engaging and you like the people, you like the course subject, then, putting on the hat should be a pretty smooth transition at the end of the day. But sometimes maybe we have classes where it's just really lecture heavy. We're currently in class wearing our school hat, but then, oh no, we start putting on our entrepreneur hat because we're bored and we know we could potentially do something that could help, I don't know, make an Instagram post, make a caption, make a video script idea to post on social media. It's all these little things that just suddenly come right at you when you're in a position where it's like, you really should be paying attention to what is being said, but you end up not because just like everybody else, sometimes you just not want to wear that hat at that time, or you're maybe not into it fully. And sometimes there's nothing wrong with that, but you know, as long as I've gotten pretty good grades throughout college. As long as I still maintain those good grades, that tells me I'm doing something well. And as long as I can get pretty much, cross my T's and dot my I's for all my papers in terms of like my academia and ensuring that I have a good resounding essay, then that's pretty much all that matters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that entrepreneur brain or creative brain or whatever you want to call it, never wanting to turn off is a blessing and a curse for sure. So,
Mm.
Logan, do you feel like you've lost out on social life or missed opportunities because you've been running runners high?
Not at all. I know that's something weird to say. I mean, that's just really depending on what we consider like a social life. Like, I don't know, maybe going out to downtown Bryan for a first Friday with maybe one or two of your friends, like a social life. And then for the weekend, maybe you're just, taking care of homework assignments. And then maybe you have a small little get together like on a Sunday. Like, I'm not someone, I know College Station has the Northgate, the nightlife district, entertainment district, or really the nightlife district. Um, and I'm just not a big fan of that, partially because it's past my bedtime when those places become more active, and I much rather just be at home doing, maybe if I'm up at midnight, I'm at home, not at a bar in Northgate. Nothing wrong with that kind of crowd that does that. That's to each of our own. And there's value into that because we have a lively, actually, nightlife because of that. But that's just not my cup of tea. And I like to be social in other ways. And honestly, after still keeping up my business and being in a group of like student entrepreneurs in my student org, like that's become like my kind of like my friend circle, my group, because we're all business owners. We all kind of like have the same motivation, same drive that we want to have like successful businesses that are turning profits. And we're friends because of that, and we're friends because we get along. We sometimes does marketplaces together, and we're all going through the same things, especially some of my friends in grad school where they think it's cool that like I'm still running a business at the same time. And I'm also impressed that they can do a lot of things that I still kind of struggle to understand, like maybe technologically speaking, like maybe with like ArcGIS, with GIS mapping to with like graphic design, because God forbid if I ever use an Adobe product, I can use Canva, but not Adobe. I don't understand the user interface, or like, oh yeah, I took an entire course for it, still did not get anything out of that. And that's just because wasn't able to apply it as much. Going back to social life, I don't feel like my social life has taken know, it never took a turn. Granted, I was just not really outgoing my freshman and sophomore years, and that might have just been because we were still bouncing back from a COVID pandemic at the time. And then junior and senior year, you kind of get forced to be more social as a business owner. It's just generally talking to people because people ask you what this is all about. So you got to be genuine with them. You got to be transparent, and most importantly, you got to be friendly with it. And so over time, it's just because I've gotten to know people because of the cookies. And there's a lot of people like in my circle that probably would have never crossed paths with had it not been for this, basically for this business. So it's important. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned your treasure for Aggie entrepreneurs, and that some of these
Yes.
people kind of are your good friends and you hang out with them. How has the student org been helpful for your business?
Well, pretty incredible as, through the student organizations, student business owners, as far as we know, can actually bring their stuff onto campus with student organizations as a little fundraiser for the organization. And, it's a moment that we can actually be on campus and basically the heart of College Station, heart of Aggieland, and hit students, faculty, staff, adults, people just walking through. You hit basically you hit pretty much, you know, a huge diversity in terms of like clients, and yeah, you can get better sales out there. And student orgs are important because, yeah, they not only kind of provide that route for a student business, but they also present forms of community with other student businesses. Like, oh yeah, I've had people ask me like for instruction, like, how do you do this? How do you get those stickers for cottage food requirements? How do you figure out an event setup? Where did you get your pop-up tent? And you're almost now serving as, you've been doing this for so long, a new crowd comes in and you're now serving as basically like as a teacher for them to like perform better and for them to actually hit, kind of how you've done, or to really prevent them from making the same mistakes that someone made because no one told them how to do so. And so that's really important for a student organization to kind of capitalize on that. And so when originally, Aggie Entrepreneurs used to be the Student Business Owners Association, and so when one of my friends' close friends joined the org, and I told him about like how a student organization that I wasn't a part of invited me to sell, and I hit a sales record on campus, we were just like, how do we recreate that? And so that led us to eventually creating, Aggie Entrepreneurs off of the skeleton that was its old counterpart SBOA. And because of that, it's like we've created our own, community of student entrepreneurs. We're still going through grow up pains as we, really try to welcome more people, not just like retail, but actual like people that are wanting to do startups, and try to find them connect them with like the resources in town to help them with their startups. But I'm still, retail pop-ups are my bread and butter, and really trying to help them get opportunities to sell in an area where there's only a handful of markets that are already congested. And so let's be on campus and use our privilege as students to as much as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. I know for me at ACU, we have the Growing Center, which is like the McFerrin Center there, and I mean, it's been extremely helpful. So it's great to hear that. I mean, of course, A&M being at the big school has that type of thing, but it's great to hear that people. It's not like overly diluted with 60,000 people, right? It's still something that if you have a business, you want to get involved, go ahead and do it.
Cool. Do you have any other questions, Turner?
I want to hear a little bit about urban planning. So
I do too.
I just give us a couple, like a 1 or 2 minutes of just like what is urban planning? Because I know a couple people who go to A&M who do that, and I don't fully understand what it is.
So, urban planning is basically literally kind of the planning of cities. And this is, when you say city, this can be, Houston Metro to your small rural town in West Texas, for example, that, you know, it's very interesting when you talk about the history of planning because initially it was not a thing until very much to the 20th century, where cities were really late 19th to early 20th century, where yeah, you really had cities just kind of growing because that was just where people were going, and you subsequently had the issues of congestion. That meant people at the time, not cars, and they did not have infrastructure, sewage. They did not have housing. There was no proper systems to actually ensure that if places were going to have more people, that people could still live comfortably. And then that's when practices like comprehensive planning, which were like city documents to guide officials on important decisions like zoning, where buildings can be placed versus where other buildings can. And that eventually also included like public transportation networks, really trying to ensure that like cities kind of match the pace of growth of the people that were living there, and ensuring that like yeah, people can actually live comfortably and affordably in places and are welcome to be in these places, and that this is also centers for economic activity, and we're gonna kind of building the cities for the future is what you're doing. But that was that's in theory. Then there's a lot of issues that kind of come up with, and that's one of the biggest things that urban planners deal with are car dependency, at least here in the USA, where everyone and their mother relies on a car in order to get around, which is a very scary thing when I realized, oh shoot, my entire life was because I was either in the backseat of a car or driving. And if you took out that car, then you had no access to food, wealth, to school, to loved ones, and it gets pretty scary when it's like, okay, you can't even access anything without a car. And that's car dependency at its finest. And then there's also like there's also the suburban sprawl problem, where you have the issue of developers just kind of copy and pasting development, and that is very harmful for not only the infrastructure, because you don't actually let things develop naturally, where there is like maybe you don't immediately build like a skyscraper. You're building like small middle housing of like townhomes, and then there's like businesses down below, and that's basically now mixed use development. But back in the day, that was just how housing was, where there wasn't a need to separate uses. Everything was just kind of together. You could live up above your the downtown bakery. You could have lived above like washateria. You could have lived above your hardware store at the time. And now that's the conversation is coming back, because in terms of real estate, there is more value to be had in and authentic downtown mixed use areas, because the more people that are in an area density wise, the more chances you have for customers, which is why I'm interested in urban planning. But also on the transportation side, it's like, yeah, you can be a transportation planner, you can be in economic development, you can focus on like hazard and resilience planning for communities that may be affected by storms, and you're ensuring that future growth is not going to be impacted by like environmental degradation. I know I'm trying to give a mouthful, but it's almost that modern urban planning is really trying to address excuse my crassness, but like the 20th century planners made back in the day, that led to a lot of the issues that we have now with like car dependency, lack of middle housing, and places where we find out, oh yeah, we built houses in neighborhoods in flood zones. Whoopsies. And so that's what urban planners are really trying to prevent. They're really trying to prevent issues from arising in the first place. And if they do, it's how do we get people together to come up and work together for a solution for their communities, because not every community is the same and people react differently to different problems. And of course, there's also like you can work for governments, you can work for the private sector, and then there's like technical aspects where it's like you can be an engineer and do highway, city planning, transit planning, because they look for more technical stuff that way. Or you can be more of the community planner that is engaging with local residents to figure out like what their needs are, and adjusting plans to propose to like city council members to vote on.
Yeah. Don't talk to any one of any of us here about drainage and water. It's awful. We all hate it.
Yeah, well, whenever it rains up in Abilene, it just becomes a flood zone. Like there's
Yeah, it
water
is
running down
awful.
the streets. But
Mhm.
Logan,
Thankfully, we're on a hill, but Anyway, yeah.
Last thing. Have you heard of
Mhm.
the line in Dubai?
Yes, I think I know what you're talking about. It was like a mega city where like everything was supposed to be like I don't know what kind of like wasn't it what was the dimensions?
Well, I don't know exactly, but it was basically going to be in a wall. Like,
Well, I think it failed. I don't think that actually got the funding, so it was never going to be a thing. Or at least as far as I've heard recently, that's never been discussed about in our actual classes because I think the professor's like, yeah, that you can't get that funded.
yeah, I wasn't sure, but I had heard the idea and thought it was kind of crazy, but also kind of cool because, I mean, to your point, like most cities, like in Abilene, you couldn't not have a car. Really,
Mhm.
you have to, especially in the South. In the Northeast, it's maybe a little bit more possible. But well, Wes, any last questions, or are we good to go?
No, I got no other questions. Thank you, Logan, for joining us. How can we learn more about you and
Well,
like your company?
Well, I guess right now, visiting the website is usually kind of like what I like to say to people, but then also going to my Instagram where I regularly update things there. The website is just runnershighcookies.com, literally just runners high. And like that kind of like term you get when you get like that rush of endorphins and then just cookies, no spaces. And
Mm,
then the same thing for Instagram. That's basically how I keep up to date. I'm not really posting as much. I try to post about every other week or so, or try to keep up every 7 days because I'm trying to avoid the trap of like where your social media just becomes like the same post over and over again. So definitely trying to improve my social media that way or try to keep it more genuine. But yeah,
mhm,
those are kind of my best ways to try to see like, oh, what's runners high cookies, what's Logan doing nowadays?
mhm. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for
Yeah,
coming on. That's a wrap.
you bet. I
Yep.
really appreciate y'all.
Yeah.